And with that, of course, we'd like to thank Ken Hackstall from ARPDC, who is managing our Zoom and has helped with the technology for each one of our mornings and will be with us this afternoon for our closing address as well. So thank you as always, Ken, for being with us and engaged. We're super excited to come to you on our last day of the live session for Symposiums. Just a note that the recordings are being posted up in the Symposium site and everything will be maintained there until May 18th, as we know that it's a busy week to try and fit everything in. The panel discussions and these addresses are being recorded and posted up there as well.
So as you might have noticed, we're back home again. So we made it home last night, just in time for the Oilers game. So it was perfect.
If you were with us yesterday morning, we began our address on Treaty 7 territory in Fort McLeod. So we are very happy to once again acknowledge that we're joining you today from Treaty 6 territory, a traditional meeting grounds, gathering place, and traveling route to the Cree, Saulteaux, Blackfoot, Dene, and Nakota Sioux, and the traditional homeland of the Métis.
And we're aware and we honor that some of you are joining us from other treaty areas and Métis zones across the province.
We acknowledge all the many Indigenous footsteps that have marked these lands for centuries. So once again, we are Kurtis and Lorna Hewson, lead learners and co-founders of Jigsaw Learning, and super excited to be joining you here this morning on a day where we're going to focus in on that third foundational component of a continuum of supports. Each day we've come forth with this message.
Every child deserves a team. We truly, strongly believe this to the bottom of our hearts. And we would encourage you to continue to think today, as we've asked you to do the last 2 days, to really keep that in mind and to ponder what does that actually mean and what does that actually look like in your school and across your districts.
So as we've done each morning, when we engage with schools and districts in workshops, webinars, on-site or virtual support and coaching, we often focus on the how. How do you go about doing this? How do we really truly actualize something that's not theoretical, that is really steeped in clear structures, processes, and logistics, but we've taken the opportunity over the last 3 mornings to dig into the why. What's the why behind each one of these components? So when we think about the why behind the continuum of supports, we really want to focus in on not just how we utilize this as a mechanism to support students, but also as a way to challenge, inform, and continue to place an unrelenting focus on our practice.
So once again, we bring to you or share with you one of those challenging statements or a statement that really creates that cognitive dissonance again, or creates that opportunity to really think deeply about what's behind this statement. So we can put primary focus on supporting classroom practice when we tier the supports and not the students. And we're going to spend the next half hour, 20 minutes, really focusing in on what does that mean exactly?
So let's take a moment to reflect back on where we've come. There was certainly a time when we can remember in our teaching and educational careers when there was that belief out there that we needed to be uniform in our teaching, that when a student struggled, the support for that student was designated to somebody outside the classroom. Lorna can speak to this from personal experience when she began her career.
When I first started my career, as for many new teachers, you get a position that is a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And I had a halftime teaching assignment. I had a 0.3 music assignment, music teacher, and a 0.2 resource room allocation. And so not really understanding that fully, but basically what it looked like is that I was assigned to work with a number of students from grade 3. I would walk down to the classroom, pick up the students, we would walk to another room, we would do some activities around literacy, knowing that that was the area of focus, and then I'd take the kids back to their classroom. We very seldom, although over time, we did get better at connecting to the classroom teacher about what was happening, but basically we were doing, I was doing this work with the students separate and apart from anything that was going on in the classroom.
So that instructional response was uniform, and if the student didn't quite fit, they went somewhere or they went with someone. And then we moved. We shifted a couple decades ago to really looking at an understanding that students' needs differ. And how could we ensure that most students would see success through our universal differentiated classroom practice? This idea of tiering students really made sense in regards to allocation of resources and understanding and establishing realistic targets for students who might be requiring additional supports. We recognize that a lot of our students would have success with really good core instructional practice, but some were going to require more. And it was actually our duty as school systems to be able to allocate those additional resources, the additional time, the intervention that could bring forth the success for our students. But the percentages of what we would expect to be able to need more intensive supports really led to this pyramid type understanding. When you think about the percentages, a pyramid makes sense when you're tiering the kids.
So Todd Rose speaks about the myth of averages and would suggest that it's inappropriate to tier a student as no student fits those categories succinctly each and every day.
We'd really encourage you, search out Todd Rose on YouTube. He has a great TED Talk around this idea of a jagged profile.
So each child, well, and each adult for that matter, has a jagged profile in which we have areas of strength and areas of challenge that dictate who we are as a human being. And when we acknowledge this, it forces us to move away from tiering and labeling, because one label can't possibly fit any one profile.
When we think about those tiers, to be able to say that Francine is a tier 3 student, that's really quite limiting and categorically doesn't adopt this idea of you can't attach a singular label to describe a child.
So when you take a look at this picture of a jagged learning profile for Francine, she has incredible reasoning skills, but she struggles with her reading. And for Sharif, he has an excellent memory, but is challenged with language skills. For both of those students, a different response is required, taking into account both their strengths while attending to those challenges.
So it's the idea of that one size does not fit all. And for us in our context, one tier does not either. We know that students are going to be at different spaces at different times for different reasons. And how do we account for that?
So over the last 3 days, we've really talked about the substantial mind shifts integral to collaborative response. On Tuesday, we challenged you with the idea of supporting the student by shifting the focus off the child and onto that key issue. And then yesterday, we proposed that we best support our most at-risk students in the classroom by not focusing on them in every level of team. Today, we're suggesting to stop tiering the students and instead tier the supports.
When you tier the students, it potentially directs us to an examination of what's wrong with them and can lead to, in some of those spaces, to deficit thinking about our students and their abilities. What will the student need to do in order to move down a tier? It intentionally shines a light on the child and what they need to do to succeed. In best case scenarios, we redirect and put that light onto us, but that's not always the case when we look at tiering the kids. However, when you tier the supports, not the child, it substantially shifts that conversation. It honors that each child has that jagged profile, recognizing they may need different types of supports in different areas at different times, and demands the response to the question, so what should we do? What do we need to look at, whether within our own individual classrooms or across our school, across our system? Who needs to be engaged in that support?
So when we think of that continuum of supports, then it really shines a light on our response. The focus is on our response, the response that adults have in terms of what students need.
So where do we start? How do we move from a theoretical red puzzle piece to something that's tangible, accessible, a tool that we can utilize with our staff? So let's return to our questions that we posed yesterday morning. We suggested that the first question we should be asking within our school, within our district is, so what priorities are we focusing on? Or potentially what priority are we focusing on? What is the thing that we're trying to do that we're looking to have impact, whether that's in a school improvement plan, a district educational plan? What is it that we are trying to impact?
And then it's the conversation around what screeners could we possibly be using that would align with those priorities.
Essentially, which kids should we be paying attention to in relation to this? So we know that over the past 2 years, schools have really put a focus on wellness. And so if that priority is around wellness, we should be asking, well, how do you know which students we should be looking at? Do we have a way to screen those that are in need of substantial support, some support, or who's doing well right now at this particular time?
And the natural next question then is, what do we or could we do when a student struggles in that particular area?
So again, thinking of that wellness example, what is it that we do within our classrooms, within our school, or outside of our school from our communities that we could be considering in order to ensure all of our students are seeing growth and success in that particular priority area?
So this initiates a super messy,
very messy,
but powerful conversation that begins by honoring the current practice in every classroom across your school. Essentially, we're saying we do good things. Now, what are they? And who is responsible?
Absolutely.
For those?
So the idea here is, although teaching is incredibly complex, our everyday responses often are not. It's sometimes the simple things that we put in place that brings across success.
Derek Silvers has a great YouTube video that's titled "Obvious to You, Amazing to Others," that perpetuates that idea that what we think is just everyday normal practice, things that I do naturally as a classroom teacher.
Well, and doesn't everybody do what I do? Yeah.
And for others, they hear it and go, well, I just never thought about it like that. So being able to really surface those things that we do naturally within our practice that we really don't think is a big deal.
Or when we think about the complexity of the everyday, it may be even the, I used to do that, or, oh, why didn't I think of that? Well, we're all busy. We're trying to attend to all of these needs. We can't be accessing everything out of our toolbox at every time.
So when we begin to do some work with schools around continuum of supports, we often hear schools who have jumped into that sticky note activity to be able to say, well, we weren't noting lots and lots of different strategies and ideas because teachers really weren't thinking that that's what we're asking for. We're looking for something brilliant and amazing, but yet we really want to get down to what are those simple things that you're doing on a daily basis that have positive impact on students and their learning.
When you think about it, you know, well, that's just what I do. that could be exceptionally valuable to somebody else, or innovative even to somebody else, or it may even trigger an idea of something that hadn't been considered previously. Really, what that continuum in time does is it just generates thought and what could we be potentially doing.
So let's think about a simple strategy of a teacher standing in the doorway, welcoming their students at the beginning of the day.
And
So,
again, it's
very simple.
Doesn't everybody do that?
And isn't it a given? It's one of those things that lots and lots of teachers do. Very simple. But when we begin to really examine what that does for a student at the beginning of their day, it actually is quite a powerful strategy. So it creates that sense of belonging, a sense of safety, creating that welcoming environment for all students, the connection, that moment of connection, first thing in the morning with a teacher, the moment of connection for other students as well. There is so many things that is going on in that one simple strategy of the welcoming of the teacher at the door.
So once that strategy now is tangibly or physically on our continuum, it paves the way for further inquiry. Well, how do you do that? What does that look like? I do that, but it doesn't seem to work as effectively as it does for you. What is it that you say or do that brings about that impact? That continuum really deprivatizes practice. It opens up an opportunity for us to examine pedagogy and opens conversations about what it is that we do, and even better, what is it that we do that's having positive impact for students.
And really opens that door for us to share with each other across every room, even again, in those small practices that do have positive impact.
It's often funny when we see teachers who have taught together for 5, 10, 15 years that go, I had no idea you were doing that or utilizing that program or that site. And you become, well, actually, I've never actually been in your classroom to see you teach for a substantial amount of time. It's just not always a given within our context.
Or even sometimes we hear teachers say, oh, I used to do that a long time ago. I've forgotten all about that.
So then what becomes important when we look at tiering those supports is we determine who is responsible with a primary emphasis focused on first honoring and then supporting what is it that we do as teachers in the classrooms. When we tier the supports, tier 1 then becomes the things we do in all classrooms for all students. We decided that standing at the door is a powerful strategy. We're all going to do that and commit to that being one of our big rocks at tier 1.
Tier 2 becomes the things that could be provided or directed by the teacher for some students some of the time. And of course, this is when we get that opportunity to be able to talk about and note differentiation.
I do this, you do this. Hey, there's an idea that Jeff has, Ian has an idea. We open up our toolboxes and really put out all the different possibilities. Again, we often say that a continuum is not about scripting practice. It's about opening possibilities, even though at tier 1, there's some big rocks that we agree we will see across our classroom. Tier 3 then becomes the interventions provided by someone other than the classroom teacher, another member of our school team who now jumps in to be able to provide that support when after we've done and in some cases exhausted all the things that we could put in place by tier 2, let's reach out and add one more layer onto the support.
And tier 4 becomes those interventions provided by someone external to the school. Our shift of focus on who provides the supports dramatically reconceptualizes how we respond.
So a great consideration around this is this. One-to-one EA support. So educational assistants working one-to-one with a student within the classroom. Now, when we tier the students, this is most likely a highly intensive support. It's costly for us that we would consider putting in place at our highest tiers. But when we think about tiering the supports, the one-to-one EA support is actually under the direction of the classroom teacher. It's the classroom teacher who is directing and supporting that one-to-one support. It's really tier 2. It's a tier 2 support we could consider before we ever go beyond. It dramatically helps us, again, reconceptualize how we go about supporting students. Now, we know Tammy's in the audience, so I hope there's a big smile on your face as we share a sample of what does this look like that comes from our friends with Whitecourt Central.
So of course, today we're not sharing the process of getting to this place.
We're on the why, why not the how.
Please reach out and take a look on the website. We've got lots and lots of videos, of course, for Symposium that talk about the development of your continuum. But the menu of supports that's developed through our process.
And we like that idea of it's a menu. It's ideas that we can choose and select and consider taking on.
It really reinforces that concept that every teacher is both a learner and an expert, and allows us to surface all of those ideas as an expert. I can share my expertise with you in a very non-threatening way, but also at the very same time, I'm a learner because I'm gathering all those strategies from my peers and colleagues.
So this is where the process is so important. Us taking Whitecourt Central and putting our logo on it, asking permission for that, actually is not congruent with that messy process that we're talking about. For a teacher to be able to say, there's things on that continuum that are there because I do those. They're things I've shared and I know they make a difference for kids. But there's also strategies, accommodations, and interventions on that continuum that I need to learn more about. Who's our expert? Who's the person on staff that can help me in that area, that can help support my continued growth and learning?
And it becomes a very, very natural, organic way through professional learning that your own experts get an opportunity to share what they know.
So we've got good news and bad news, and it's the exact same statement. The continuum is never done. So for those that want to be able to, be nice to put a tidy bow, check off, we've done that. You can, but to know it's never finished. We're always going to be coming back to further refine and reiterate what is it that we are finding out now that's having impact for students.
So that constant state of refinement is particularly important when we think about those classroom practices at tier 1 and tier 2.
This is where a pyramid shape does not fit when we tier the supports. Essentially, what we do with each iteration, with each refinement, we see a narrowing at tier 1, a deepening understanding of the big rocks that we agree will put in place that are school-wide in every classroom for every student. Now, this doesn't mean in any way that we're removing autonomy, that we're saying you must teach like I do, and Jeff has to conform to what it is that somebody somewhere said we have to do. But rather what we're doing is we're building a common understanding of what practices we agree are essential for a student's success. And in time, what are things that research would also suggest are integral for us? So that narrowing at tier 1 becomes really, really important.
And while that narrowing happens at tier 1, then tier 2 begins to expand and grow as we continue to explore and build those differentiated strategies, accommodations, and interventions that could be considered when a student struggles.
We've talked before about the bulge at tier 2, the increasing amount of things we could be trying.
And this is clearly a very unique shape that we often have trouble explaining.
We don't know if it's a candy corn, a teardrop, a cone. I don't know.
But we know that as our collective toolbox becomes deeper and deeper, it arms teachers with a wide variety of potential ideas to be able to employ for the students that they are working with.
And the idea that when we tier students, and we can put a definitive line between what's the difference between tier 1 and tier 2. And again, we would argue, I don't think you can fit students with a definitive line due to that jagged profile that we've talked about. But when we tier the supports, there may not be a clear line. There may be gradients. What's something that Adele does in her room for all students? That might be something I could consider, but it may not fit me. Unless we've said it's a big rock at tier 1, it is just that consideration that we have in place.
So this becomes an incredible anchor resource that we can use anytime we publicly or personally ask, what should we do?
And it's really important when we think the publicly, when we're in teams, that anchor resource should be there. But in time, it's also the one I can go to individually and personally and see, is there another idea I could try?
And we really talk about the development of this continuum for our collaborative team meetings, but we really would encourage you to use this continuum in any team meetings. And as we mentioned, for individual teachers, especially for new teachers, to be able to access that menu when they're looking for ideas for how they can support their students.
And we do hope people are following the chat window. Thank you for the comments and love the analogy, Ken. So when we tier the supports in a school or district, we are essentially creating a tangible, valuable tool we can hold in our hands that's the result of an ongoing conversation about pedagogy.
And we sometimes see people create a beautiful poster, it's a pretty poster that hangs on the wall.
At one point, absolutely.
But if we create that pretty poster that is never revised, we have actually robbed our teams of the ongoing opportunity to reflect deeply on their practice and really are being able to articulate succinctly the many things that they do that have impact on students.
Again, the continuums that we develop for our different priority areas over time become the anchor resources that are essential to be able to consult and look at to fuel ongoing conversations. When we come back and continually refine that continuum, we're further refining our practice, and that hermeneutic idea of constant cycling and iterations, that every time we come back, it's with deeper sets of understanding and collective understanding. We've often said it opens up a collective toolbox that we can all be able to access or consider when we are thinking about, so what do we do? How do we answer that essential question of what's our response going to be when a student struggles? Not what's the student going to do, but what can we do to support that?
So the development of a continuum of supports is not merely just that PD one-day activity or creating that pretty poster, but it really has the potential to impact practice on an ongoing move forward. So we want to just wrap up our time together today. We want to thank you for the morning, and again, joining us early in the morning before we know that you all have very busy days. So thank you so much for joining us today.
So we do have two panel discussions and a discussion forum at noon related to this concept or foundational component of a continuum of supports. And then we'd love for you to be able to join us today at 4 p.m. for our live closing address. We do have some door prizes from our sponsors with IntelliMedia and Corwin that we'll be announcing. You have to be there in order to win that, and we'll finalize with some final notes of hope and returning back to this idea of every child deserves a team.
Have a fantastic day, everyone. Take care.
And check out the pre-recorded sessions, as there's a number that are focused in on that continuum. Thanks so much, everyone. All the best.